This is the Outlander Club, a Rebel Scum podcast. Everyone has a story. Here are those Star Wars stories. Don't forget to join us on Patreon for exclusive bonus content and early access. Here's your host, James Razile.
No, I'm telling you, it's going to be great. When have I ever steered you wrong?
Joining me today is one of the most positive Star Wars podcasters out there. He hosts a podcast with his sons called Tatooine Sons. Like I said, is extremely positive and gives a unique perspective hearing a father discuss the franchise, the saga, with his two boys. It is a great show, a great podcast, Tatooine Sons. Listen to it wherever you can. Today's Outlander Club features me talking with David Jesse from Tatooine Sons.
Leave that to me.
And joining me now is David Jesse from the Tatooine Sons podcast. How you doing?
What's up? It's good to be here. Awesome talking to all the Rebel Scums out there.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me here on the Outlander Club portion of the Rebel Scum podcast. I can't wait. I wanted to talk to you for a while about Star Wars because you are a little bit of a fan. Like, you're just learning. You're just learning Star Wars. You just got into it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was like 2 years old when the original trilogy came out, and all I can remember from my childhood is Star Wars. So,
yeah.
And I'm not going to say that my childhood was ruined by anything. So it was awesome because of Star Wars. So
yeah, well, thankfully it wasn't ruined by it, but your adulthood was probably made a little bit better by it, especially in the form of a pork. But we'll get into that.
Yeah, Turbis. Yeah, definitely.
Turbis the pork cannon. Can't believe you got to change all your merch. That must have been annoying.
It was, it was probably the funnest 6 hours of that day was going in there. People were like, "Where do we go to shirts?" I'm like, "Oh crap! I got to do shirts now, so let's fix them." So yeah, it's awesome.
To do it all. We will get to Turbis in a little bit, but before we get started, before we get to that, while we get started, you were 2. You said when the OT came out. That's what we all call it, the OT. So when was the first time you saw Star Wars? Was it A New Hope? Was it Empire? Was it Jedi?
Well, now, it depends on how you define seeing Star Wars. If you're talking about like purely seeing it in a movie theater, it wasn't until my birthday in 1997 when the special edition first came out. But as far as Star Wars going, my earliest recollection of anything Star Wars related is being probably 3 or maybe 4 years old, and it was on HBO. And it was one of those movies that HBO got that they played over and over and over again because it was like the prime movie that everybody wanted to watch. So I literally probably watched that thing 30 or 40 times just over and over again on HBO as a little boy, trying to see it. And that's when I fell in love with Star Wars. And it was nuts. I remember all my friends going to see. My family never went to movies when I was a little kid. That was just not our thing. And interestingly, the first movie that I ever saw in the movie theater was my dad thought it would be cool to take us to go see Star Trek: The Motion Picture on Christmas Day, which in the movie theater. I'm 4 years old in 1979 watching Star Trek, and that was weird. But anyway. Yeah, and I kept trying to figure out how it connected with Luke Skywalker because at 4 years old, Star Trek, Star Wars, what's the difference, right? It didn't make any connection. My friends, though, all went and saw Empire Strikes Back together as a group, and I wasn't able to go. And I remember them, we think about spoilers now and how we like mute notifications and mute words on Twitter and everything to keep from spoilers. I'm sitting in the backyard with my friends, and we've got these, the Kenner action figures that we're all playing with, and I have no idea what the Empire story is, and they're not telling me because they don't want to ruin the "I am your father."
Oh, amazing!
And so then it comes out on HBO, and they're like, "Come on, we're coming to you're coming over to the house," and they're all watching me watch that moment, and I'm like, "No!" Freaking out at like 5, 6 years old, watching this, trying to figure out if it's true. Return of the Jedi. Yeah, so that was, playing Star Wars for me as a little kid was, we watched all the movies, but it was library books. As a little kid reading, like the movie picture books. Where they would have like all the descriptions of the story and like big, like 14-inch hardback books, you know what I'm talking about, with that. reading through the stories that way, seeing it on HBO, seeing it on VHS, sort of losing some interest in Star Wars after we stopped playing in the backyard. We had it was fun. Our backyards, we had Transformers, G.I. Joe, Star Wars, the Mask figures, all those, and there was just one big giant battle. That was everything that we were playing with our stories. I remember as a little kid, everybody talking about this Anakin Skywalker, but nobody wanting to tell me who he was. And I remember we decided he was going to be Luke Skywalker's twin brother while we were playing lightsabers and stuff in our backyard, which we had no idea at the time that the twin was actually going to happen.
Yeah.
In Return of the Jedi. So we did that, and that was it for me, was Star Wars. That was growing up until the early 90s when I got into the books and things like that.
Did you ever have the 35s, the records, the little ones with the books that were like, when R2 makes a bloop bloop, turn the page?
Oh yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's how I learned how to read.
That was Star Wars for me. Like I said, I remember watching Star Wars on TV a lot whenever it was on. But then, we didn't have VHS. We didn't have any of that stuff growing up. And so it was the books, it was the records like you're talking about, and then it was just playing with it. The saddest Star Wars story I have from my childhood was my 5th birthday. My mom got me one of the big dolls of Luke Skywalker. You know what I'm talking about, the big dolls. And I took it to school, and I'm convinced to this day somebody stole it. I may have just lost it as like a 6-year-old kid that shouldn't have taken it to school, but I'm convinced to this day that somebody stole that doll from me. And I like that. I think about it every time I see one of those action figures, one of those tall ones. Yeah. I think about losing that.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it was. It was devastating.
Would that be, if I were to ask you right now, which figure, playset, whatever is the one that would take you back the most, that you look at the most fondly? Would that be the one now because of that instance, you think?
It was that, and then I remember buying a Boba Fett during Return of the Jedi and thinking how absolutely awesome it was to own a Boba Fett figure and how cool that was. Those two things are really memories. So connecting that to where we are now, we were at Mile High Comics, which is the world's largest comic book store. It's got 100,000 square feet or something. It's got like 10 million comics. It's in Denver. We were there, and they've got a bunch of Star Wars comics and memorabilia and collectibles. And we were walking by, and they had one of those Luke Skywalker dolls, and it was like insane amount. And my wife, I'm like standing there just staring at it, and I'm like contemplating how I can justify buying this thing. And my wife's like, "Come on, we're leaving." But then on top of that, the Boba Fett, Samuel, my oldest son, had his, he graduated from high school last May, and for his, one of his gifts as a senior is I got him a 1979 Boba Fett action figure with a stand and all of that. So it's been fun to see how all that came full circle.
That's so cool. So after you're done with playing with that and in the books, you learned how to read. You don't need those records anymore. You moved on now.
Right.
And the special editions have not hit yet. It's not your birthday yet. In between there, did you read any of the books, or were you was Star Wars just in the rearview mirror and you weren't really looking back at it for that time?
I just was for a long time unaware that there was an expanded universe. And so not knowing that was out there, I'm thinking the movies are done. And I didn't know that they were going to be coming out with anything new. And so I remember going to Walden Books in the mall to pick up a copy. I must have been, 15 or 16 years old. I walked to the mall, and I go to the science fiction and fantasy section to pick up a copy of The Hobbit. And I see this whole massive, 3 shelves of Star Wars books. And I literally just sat down on the floor for an hour and just read the back covers of I'm like, I did not know any of this exists. And so I'm standing there and I'm making a decision. Okay, I'm buying The Hobbit because I have to have that for something at school. And I'm holding in my hand 2 different Star Wars novels, and The first one is Truce at Bakura because it's taking place literally like weeks or something following Return of the Jedi. So I'm thinking, well, this is the next story that I want, right? And I'm reading it, and it sounds pretty interesting, and I never bought that one. The other one I'm looking at is Heir to the Empire. And I made the decision to get Heir to the Empire with Timothy. So I must have been older than that. I don't know, what year did Heir to the Empire come out?
It was like 92, I want to say.
Yeah, so I was a bit like a senior in high school with that. So I was 16 probably because I started school a little early. So yeah, I'm sitting there and I'm reading that, and I bought Heir to the Empire and went home and I like read it straight through all night long. Timothy's on, loved it, found out that there were 2 more, ended up getting those. And then, it was some of the audio dramas. I remember getting some of the, I ended up going back and getting Heir to the Empire as an audiobook. And it was cool because it was Dennis Lawson that narrates that.
Oh, nice.
Wedge Antilles. Yeah, and so that was pretty cool. And then some of the Dark Forces, or the Dark Empire. That's it. The Dark Empire comics. They had created audio dramas of those as well. And so I picked up some audio dramas of the Dark Empire series and some of the craziness that went on with that, and the clone Luke and all of that. And then I moved on. It was college time. It was time to move on with my life, and I always wanted to buy more stuff and read more stuff, and I just never did. And then I guess Christy and I were engaged, and that was probably the next big Star Wars thing for me. We were engaged. We were living in Alabama, and we went to some movie, and they showed a trailer for a special edition of New Hope, and I could not believe it was coming back to the theaters. And we were joking before we started recording, but my wife absolutely can't stand Star Wars. She has no interest in it whatsoever. The only interest she has in it right now is the fact that she better talk about something Star Wars related, or her family won't talk with her about anything. And so that's unfortunate. So for my birthday, it was coming out. It was released, because that's just before Thursday evening releases and any of that kind of stuff went on. And it was coming out on my birthday, A New Hope. And so that was what she bought me for my birthday. We went and saw A New Hope special edition, and I loved it. Everybody likes to throw things under the bus now with the prequels and Last Jedi and sequel trilogy and special editions, and it's sort of become a hobby of criticizing anything Star Wars related. But I loved seeing Jabba the Hutt in there. I loved seeing Boba Fett in it. I loved, instead of it being like 3 or 4 X-Wings, there's 30 or 40 X-Wings flying across the screen, and the colorization was better. And I had purchased the VHS of the original versions. I had purchased the 3-pack that's so famous about that, with Darth Vader on the box and all that. And so I had that, but seeing this in the theaters was absolutely amazing. And then to think that they were coming out the next month with Empire, and the month after that with Return of the Jedi, it was pretty special. And at the time, I had no idea that the prequels were being made. And so did they show a trailer or like a teaser or something like that, announcement thing during the special editions about the prequels? I can't remember.
I don't remember that either. I feel like that would have really stood out in my mind. I don't think so. I think it was just we'll get to that first Phantom Menace trailer that it was the first thing to ever break the internet. And that's because the internet barely worked anyway. So it was like that. Did you see all of the special editions in the theater?
Oh yeah.
Opening nights,
absolutely.
Or did you wait?
Yeah.
Did you wait?
Opening nights. Yeah. Went to opening nights for all 3 of them. And again, that's it. That's Star Wars is over. You've had a chance to see that. I was actually selling websites to businesses, and so internet was like a really big deal in my life. When the Phantom Menace broke the internet, and I thought that was cool.
You were just like, my job's done. There's no internet.
But it was. I remember sitting there with dial-up trying to get that thing to play. On this crazy thing out there. What was it? YouTube? No, I don't think that was out yet.
I think it was just on QuickTime, wasn't it? Where you had to go to Apple.com, and then you scroll down, and they had these. The good old days. It's loading. Let's go for a walk, get some dinner. We'll come back. We'll watch it tomorrow night. Exactly. That's how it was. I agree with you though. Jabba the Hutt in A New Hope. I love that. I don't care. Han walks over the tail. He doesn't look that. I don't care. It's Jabba's in A New Hope. Whatever. I'm fine with all of that. Exactly. Now, do you remember where you were when you found out that there were going to be prequels?
I'm trying to remember specifically where I was. Yeah, I can't remember the exact situation. It was in this weird period of life where I was having to be an adult for the first time, and I had just gotten married, and life was like taking on this whole new dimension at the time. And so I remember seeing the trailer. I remember hearing about it. We saw, was it the Benjamin? What was the Meet Joe Black?
Meet Joe Black,
yeah. I remember Christy and I went and saw Meet Joe Black. I'm not sure if that was because she wanted to see that or because I talked her into it, because it had the Phantom Menace trailer in front of it. But seeing Jedi function like you always dreamed Jedi would function, even in the trailer, and the scenes on Naboo with the battle droids and the massive armies and all of that, it was. It definitely reawakened my love for Star Wars in a really, really powerful way. To think that we were going to get 3 more. And then, you have the internet. And so at this point, I'm all over the internet, scouring, trying to find out anything. I had remembered hearing at some point that they had talked about Lucas's original desire was to do a prequel and then a sequel. So I'm trying to find any information as to whether or not that's still in the plans to do a sequel trilogy and all of that, digging in with it and everything. It was a lot of fun. So
it was great. And Meet Joe Black was like a 3-hour movie. Still less time to watch that movie than to download the Phantom Menace trailer at home.
Absolutely. So.
Yeah, it was a good time. So you're excited for Phantom Menace, obviously. Did you see it opening night? Did you wait a couple of days? And what were your initial thoughts of it? Because like you said, it was cool seeing the Jedi do what we all wanted Jedi to do. But, these movies, they have caught a lot of flack over the years, especially when it was released.
I went with my buddy Matt Weisgerber. I remember in detail that evening. It was opening night. I went to work and could not think all day. Could not focus on work whatsoever throughout the entire day because I knew that we were going that night. And we went to Zaxby's and got chicken and then went to the Phantom Menace and waited in line and got in there and had great seats. And I just remember sitting there the whole time. I loved it. I loved everything about it. The moment when probably the moment that stood out for me more than anything was the moment when Anakin first comes on the Naboo ship and meets Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I'm just sitting there thinking, holy crap, we're literally seeing this moment. And trying to figure out, and of course Darth Maul was phenomenal. Seeing, Qui-Gon and Kenobi battling this Sith and trying to figure out who's going to win. And then of course you have the infamous moment where Qui-Gon is killed and sacrifices himself to save, just to do the right thing. When I look back, like I said earlier, before we started recording, I just watched the prequels this weekend with my boys, and there's holes in it now. Looking back, there's plot holes, there's things that could be better, right? But I don't remember walking out of the theater with anything but just a huge smile on my face. So excited having watched a Star Wars movie, trying to figure out how I was going to get back and see it again. I actually forced my wife to go see it the next night with me. It's like I think it's one of the only movies she saw in Star Wars, the prequels. It's the only one she saw in the theater. And we went and saw it, and I talked her into it because of Jar Jar. So thank God for Jar Jar Binks.
That's the first time anyone's ever said that.
No, and it's funny because we were talking about doing our rewatch earlier last week for the Skywalker saga, doing the 1 through 9 rewatch before episode 9 comes out, or 1 through 8 rewatch. Some craft thing she was doing at somebody's house on Saturday. And I'm like, yeah, we can watch 1 and 2 then. And she's like, 1, is that the one with Jar Jar Binks? And I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, well, let's watch that one Friday night, and then you guys can watch 2 and 3 on Saturday. I'm like, score!
That's amazing.
Yes! So we watched that with her the other night, and she's like, it's so funny because we talk about this all the time, and we feel like everybody should know this stuff because and you do too. Like, you know so much about Star Wars that you forget that there's the vast majority of humanity has no clue about most of this stuff. And she's sitting there and the opening crawl talks about the Chancellor sending these Jedi ambassadors, and then we see Darth Sidious in a hologram talking to the Nemodians really early on in this. And Christy's like, wait a second, that is the Chancellor. He sent them. She's trying to connect the dots because she doesn't realize that he isn't Chancellor yet.
Yeah.
And so she knows just enough to be confused at this point, but it's a lot of fun. I love that. And then let's see, Attack of the Clones. I guess it was about 3 years between.
Yeah. 3 years.
So it was 99, 2002, 2005, right? So 2002, I was managing a Chick-fil-A restaurant in Colorado or in Alabama, and the owner operator of the restaurant knew the management of the movie theater we were all going to go see it at. And so we're standing there in line for the midnight showing, and it's like 10 o'clock, right? And we don't, it's going to be 2 hours before the movie starts, an hour and a half, I think, before they were going to let us in. And all of a sudden, the owner operator of the Chick-fil-A I was managing came up to me. He's like, come here, bring your friend. And they let us in the back door to the theater, and then we got into the theater. Nobody else is in there. They're like, pick whichever seat you want. We got our seats. They were like, they brought us popcorn and drinks, and so I'm sitting there, like getting the VIP treatment before seeing Attack of the Clones. What was your thoughts? You said that you said before we were recording, you were talking about Attack of the Clones was like the big one that stands as far as like you going to the theater and stuff, like the preview. The Attack of the Clones was the big one for you, right?
Yeah, that one I saw. I was in college, and they had a lot of group friends in college who loved Star Wars, so we all went midnight. Back then it was midnight. There was no 7 p.m. the night before. It was always, you got to go midnight. Yeah. And that was, and I remember that was the first Star Wars movie. I mean, it was only the second, I saw the special editions, but I walked out and I was a little disappointed. And it took me a while to realize I was more disappointed in the fact that I knew what was happening without seeing it. Oh, that's
right.
And I saw it again with my parents, and I liked it so much more at the next. My parents loved it. My parents are weird. They love the prequels. And I saw it again with them, and they were like, that was so good. And I was like, yeah, but... And they're like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, because they didn't know what was happening. And then when obviously I got it on DVD, and and now that's the one that, for whatever reason, even with this new Disney era, I'm like, I feel like watching Star Wars, and it's always, I feel like watching it, for better or worse, I feel like watching Attack of the Clones. And I love my Ewoks. Cool. I love Jar Jar. I love Finn. And I love Rogue One, and I love that Solo poster behind you. But for some reason, Attack of the Clones, Zam Wesell gets me every time.
There you go. Oh, yeah. Interestingly, I guess I was spoiled too when I went to see the movie of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, but it was for completely different reasons. It had nothing to do with like spoilers on the internet. Back then, the novelizations, I see I'm looking at your screen, you got the novelization of The Phantom Menace sitting there.
I got all 3 of them.
The novelizations came out on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Before the movie came out.
Yeah.
And so both Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, I bought the novelizations the day that they came out and like read them like crazy. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that I liked Attack of the Clones so much when I saw it the first time, was because I already knew the storyline, but there's so much more depth in the novelization that fleshes out the relationship between Anakin and Padme. It wasn't sort of just the cringe moments that we all kind of make fun of. My kids were like, every time a scene came on during the prequels the last 2 days, they were like talking about the meme that's associated with that line or that sentence anywhere throughout any one of the 3 movies with it. And there was none of that, because the depth of the story was greater. The relationship with her family, the relationship with Obi-Wan and Anakin in the Revenge of the Sith novelization is heartbreaking when you get to the end. And so I was spoiled with both of them, and I think that's one of the reasons I knew what was going to happen going in, but I absolutely loved the stories. The day after Attack of the Clones came out, I called up a couple that were really close with my wife and I. And, of course, my wife had no desire to go see any Star Wars movie, but they're big Star Wars fans. And so I remember being in the theater with them watching. I wanted to see their reaction the next day when I watched it the second time. I wanted to see their reaction to Yoda battling Dooku at the end. Because when we saw it the first night, I don't know if it was like this in your theater. People make fun of it now and some people criticize it, but I loved it. I thought it was awesome. It was Yoda as I always thought Yoda should be. And so it burst into like a standing ovation the opening night when we saw it in our theater. And I'm sitting there watching these guys watch it again the next day for the first time and wanting to see their reaction. And it reminds me a lot of my friends watching my reaction to the "I am your father" moment, waiting to see what's going to happen and that kind of thing. I just watch it. He walks in with that, limps in with this cane like he's all old and all, and they're like, "Oh, what's going to happen?" You can tell, and then all of a sudden they're just clapping and laughing and cheering and all this other stuff. It was so much fun. I loved that. I think Dooku was fleshed out a lot better in the novelization as well of Attack of the Clones. So and then I think that I was like trying to really go down the rabbit hole of spoilers between 2 and 3. And I kept finding these websites that were speculating about Kenobi and his relationship with Anakin and Padme. And there were some crazy theories that are still out there today about like Kenobi had some type of a relationship with Padme, which is what causes Anakin to lose faith in Kenobi and all this, and of course that doesn't really happen in the books. But trying to remember, I could not get tickets to our local theater for Revenge of the Sith opening night. It was sold out by the time I went to go get tickets. So I drove 45 minutes to the only theater that I could find. I kept calling, "Do you have any tickets? Do you have any tickets? Do you have any tickets?" And it was before Fandango. I guess it's hard to believe that we lived before the internet.
That's not true.
Really took over everything in our lives. Our kids like wonder what's going on. Like somebody the other day, I do a sales training, and I did sales training for some inside sales reps, and we're talking about hang-ups. When somebody hangs up on you, and this like 20-something-year-old kid asked, "What does that mean?" And I'm like, well, that means that they like hang up the phone. Yeah, I know, but why do you use the word hang up? Why do we say that? And it's because he didn't understand the way old phones work, where you literally hung the receiver on there. And he was like, I'm like, oh, well, back when I was a little kid, we had these phones, Yeah, anyway, so so I drove across town and I got tickets and saw that. I had, let's see, that was 2005. So both of my kids were born by the time that happened. My oldest, Sam, was 3 or 4. Sam was 4 and had not cared at all about Star Wars at this point. It was Transformers. That was the only thing that mattered in his world. And then my youngest was like just 3-4 months old. So
no excuse not to love Star Wars already. Just no excuse.
Well, I mean, it was actually fun how they got involved. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But let's see. I watched it all by myself, 45 minutes away, and then I felt guilty for going that far to go watch a Star Wars movie. And because we didn't have the money for gas and all that at the time. And I did it anyway, and I gave up like a Thursday evening, an entire Thursday evening to go do all that and to get home till like 4 a.m. and all this kind of stuff. And so on the way home, I stopped by the only 24-hour Walmart in the area that we went to, and I went to the toy section, and I bought my oldest, because my youngest I knew wouldn't care, but I bought Sam a Kit Fisto action figure, and because I thought that's a cool looking character, and I gave it to him the next morning, and he was like, "I don't like it." I was so mad.
I don't like it.
I'm not. It was not a good dad moment for me. You ungrateful little kid. He's 4 years old. I'm shooting him out of being ungrateful.
You're moving out. I love Kit.
Right.
I love Kit Fisto. I want to get. My wife's allergic to cats. I want to get a cat though and name my cat Kit Fisto. I really think that would go over well, and they might cure her allergy.
You just go
Cat Fisto. We're good.
There we go.
We'll do it. Do you have?
Let's see.
I know which one it is because you told me. But of the prequels, do you have? Which one is your favorite and why?
Yeah, it's got to be Revenge of the Sith. Originally, it was my favorite because, like I said earlier, I'd read the novelization and the story between Kenobi and Anakin in the novelization. It's played out really well on Revenge of the Sith, but it was so much more informed by the novelization that I absolutely just was gripped by two moments that always grab me every time I watch it, even yesterday as we watched it again, is the last time Kenobi and Anakin see each other before Anakin turns to the dark side. So it's they're walking through the Jedi Temple, and Kenobi is getting ready to go to Utapau to go try to capture or defeat Grievous. And they're standing there, and he's in the ship, and they're like, "May the Force be with you," and they both say it. And knowing what's going to happen in the story, when I saw that on the big screen, I'm like. I know people around me are like, "What the heck is wrong with this dude? This isn't a sad moment." I'm like crying. I got tears coming down my face because I know that that's the last time that they're going to see each other. And then, of course, "You were my brother, you were the chosen one" stuff at the end was just powerful. That novelization is fantastic. So without a doubt, Revenge of the Sith is the best prequel.
I think Revenge of the Sith, the novelization, is probably the best Star Wars. Not maybe The Last Jedi was really good, but it might be the best.
It was good.
Revenge of the Sith, though, I don't think people give it enough credit because it is a prequel, and with the movies and whatnot. But no, it's a great novel. It's a great read.
Oh yeah, that relationship is front and center throughout everything that they do. The way that the novel is written, it's just brilliant. It's fantastic.
If people haven't read it, that's one that they need to get on.
Absolutely.
So Star Wars is gone now. We had Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
It's gone. How did your life evolve from there? Did you say again no more?
We moved within just a few months after Revenge of the Sith came out, all the way across the country, and I started a new business and moved on with my life, and never thought we'd see Star Wars on the big screen again. I kind of always hoped that they would do something like a re-release with 3D, but never that didn't happen. And let's see, we got really big into the MCU when it started. So that was, I guess, 2009 is when that happened. My sons really loved that stuff, the Iron Man and the sort of phase one of that. We were really, really into that, into every aspect of it. And they did not like Star Wars. No matter how much they just thought I was Dad's weird old, and I would force, and probably there's an element that's my fault with that, because it would be like, it's my birthday, we're watching all 6 of them, and they're like 7, like 4 or whatever, and they're like, sitting still for 30 minutes is hard. No, you're staying in here. It's my birthday. You have to, right? And so we're sitting in the living room watching 12 hours of or more, 13, 14 hours worth of Star Wars movies with it, and they hated it. It was so funny. I tried to get them into Clone Wars. I remember going to see, that was the first movie of Star Wars that they went to, which was kind of hard for me because, the movie, the theatrical Clone Wars, it was really hard to take in. It was different.
Yes.
And so that was rough. They loved that, and so I thought we could get them into the Clone Wars, but we kept losing track of the episodes and trying to find the format. I think that's I don't criticize much that Lucasfilm has done with Star Wars. I'm a pretty easygoing fan, but releasing that in an episodic format on TV versus a chronological format was weird.
Yeah, we do a show. We do a show for our Patreons called Cloning Around, which we just rewatch the Clone Wars, and we're doing it chronological. And every time I'm like, I don't. Why was it released? I don't get it. I don't know what their focus was when they started it. It was almost like, we'll just tell a bunch of stories, and then eventually they're like, wait, and then they found their footing a bit. But yeah, it is a little bit bizarre.
Yeah, it's all over the board, and so it's hard to figure out, what's going on. We come from a world where series are chronological and everything is building on top of each other, and this one wasn't, and it wasn't making sense. So we'd lose focus, and I remember sitting with them, they're little, but trying to figure out, did we miss an episode? Trying to understand what was going on in a story, and so we lost interest in it. And that was, that was the way it was. Then they made the announcement about Lucasfilm and being bought by Disney. And that reawakened everything for me. I guess that was, 2012. Yeah. And then they announced the new movies that were going to be coming out. I got excited about that. The boys didn't really get excited about any of it. I was working with a nonprofit, and we went on tour in an RV all across the country for 6 months. And so we didn't have regular TV. So it was like we would hack into Wi-Fi wherever we could do it, wherever we were parking the RV, whichever park we were at. We'd access the Wi-Fi and watch stuff on Netflix. And so we got some Clone Wars in that way, and that helped us a little bit with it. And we tried to watch some Rebels. But again, we were struggling with that was a harder one for us to get into at the beginning. It's become our favorite of all the animated series since then, but they were struggling with getting into that. And then we got back off the road, and it was right about now of 2014, I guess, when that first trailer for The Force Awakens came out. Thanksgiving weekend, I think is what it was, Black Friday.
Yeah, Black Friday. Yeah. I just got I was at the gym because I work out a lot. And I just remember I was walking to my car, freezing cold because, Canada. And I was like, and it's just like, what? And I plugged in my aux cable in my car and I watched that thing. So where were you when you saw that first teaser trailer?
We had rented out our house, so we were basically homeless. We were staying at my in-laws' house for Thanksgiving with it. And I got up really early that morning for something, I don't know, Black Friday, I don't know. And I saw that the notification came through. And if you remember, there was a lot of fake videos being released like 3 or 4 days building up to that. People saying, the trailer's out and all this crap, right? And so I see one of these notifications come up on YouTube, and I'm like, yeah, sure. But I start to watch it, and you see Finn pop up, and it was real. And so I pause it, and I rewind it to the beginning, and I wake up Sam and Nate, because I'm like, this is like you're going to see a Star Wars trailer for the first time once in your life, right? True. And so I'm like, you're going to watch this with me, whether or not. And again, they don't like Star Wars at this point. It's sort of a thing that they're like, they humor their dad with. And so they get up, wiping the crust out of their eyes and all that stuff. And I remember sitting in the living room on my stupid little iPhone, watching this video, and they're just mesmerized. And, Kylo Ren with that cross-guard lightsaber that's flickering crazy, and the snow with Finn holding the blue lightsaber, and all the speculation. And we get done watching it, and this is like the first time I could see the light bulb went off that this is Star Wars with those boys. And they were like, let's watch it again, Dad. And so we round it, and then we just like talked about Star Wars the rest of that day. And that was like the first time that I could see that they may be getting into this with me. And so in the build up for The Force Awakens, we started to try to really engage with some of the animation, Clone Wars, and Rebels, and some of that stuff. I remember we started with Rebels, and then I made them for Father's Day that year, buy me season 1, and they liked it. We watched it. It was great. And then I was like looking in the store at the cover art for season 2, and there's Maul is freaking standing on the cover art, like talking about a spoiler with this. I'm like, how the heck is Maul in Rebels? He's dead, right? So I'm on the internet trying to figure out how this happens, and they're like, Clone Wars. Everything keeps saying Clone Wars. So I'm like, we can't get season 2 yet. We've got to go watch all of the Clone Wars. So we're watching like 7 or 8 episodes a day on the weekends, trying to get caught up with the Clone Wars. And then that's when I found out that they were released in episodic order versus chronological. And so I went on StarWars.com where they had the list of the chronological order. Yeah. And I'm like, we're going to watch it in this order. And we're like, okay, wait. We're in season 1, but now we're in season 3. And then we're in season 1 again in season 2. And so we're going all over. Our Netflix is trying to figure out what the heck we're doing because we're skipping all around with it. We watched all of it all over again, and then watched season 2 of Rebels. And then the tickets went on sale for Force Awakens. We got opening night, And like I said, I'm totally spoiled for the movie, even though I don't know it. I said that earlier when we were talking beforehand. I knew all the spoilers with it, but they didn't. And they were really excited to go see a Star Wars movie, and that was probably the most important thing for me. And we're sitting in the movie theater, and it gets done, and they're just jaws on the floor. They the same way I felt about Star Wars when I was their age was how they were feeling about Star Wars in that moment. And we went and saw it again the next night and the night after that. And they were like, "Mom, you've got to come with us." And of course, when little kids ask their mom to, or teenage kids go ask their mom to go to a Star Wars movie, she goes. And of course, she doesn't care if I'd ask her, but she went along with it. And then. Let's see. So that was 2015. 2016 is Rogue One. Right before Rogue One came out, we were living here in Colorado. I interviewed to work with a nonprofit in California. And Samuel, my oldest, though he was still in high school, was getting, had tested into a program that allowed him to basically go to college concurrently with his high school enrollment, and they were paying for it. The high school was paying for his college, and he was only a sophomore in high school. And so we couldn't pull him out. So we knew I was going to have to move to California about 6 months before they were. And I was going to have to live there by myself. And that was pretty hard for the entire family, of course, but it was going to be really rough. And so we've always made the decision that gifts like around Christmas and birthday and stuff are generally going to be less about getting them stuff and more about investing in experiences, so that because memories you keep with you. Your Xbox is going to break down, but if you go to something amazing, there's great memories, that stays with you for the lifetime. And that was always what we just decided to do. So I found out that the 40th anniversary of Star Wars was going to be highlighted at this thing called Star Wars Celebration that I had never heard of before. And so I said to my wife, I'm like, you fly them down, because my oldest was 16, so he can fly by himself, or that he can like lead him and his little brother on airplanes and airports. I said, you fly them down to Orlando. I'll fly down to Orlando for that weekend, and let me take them to Star Wars Celebration for that entire weekend. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. We had never heard of it, never seen it. We had no idea about like lining up the night before for panels or any of that stuff. So we get there the night before, and the next morning is the 40th anniversary of Star Wars panel. And I'm like, let's see if we can get there earlier. I want to make sure we get seats. So we get there at like 6 a.m. And you're like, there's no way you're even getting into the main theater. At that point, people were lining up all night. We ended up getting into the theater the whole weekend. Was absolutely amazing. By then, they're big Rebels fans at this point. That was one of the things that happened when we were in California. Or when I was in California and they were here. We had watched a lot of Rebels, like I mentioned earlier, together. But that season 3 was airing a lot. That was when it was actually airing on Disney. And we would watch every episode at the same time. I was in California and they were in Colorado. We'd watch them together, and then we'd get on the phone and we'd talk about the episode. And that happened every single week. And so Rebels was a huge deal. For us. In fact, I actually flew out for my birthday. It was the weekend of Twin Suns, with Kenobi and Maul, that famous episode, and we watched that actually together, and it was that's become our favorite episode, probably because we were together for it as much as anything. Although it's a great episode. So we actually did get into the main stage for the Rebels panel. We learned enough in 3 days to do that. Literally, yeah. And we were like thinking we have to get there like 3 a.m. for it. That was the one panel where if you could just basically walk in at 7 o'clock that morning and start getting a seat for. We didn't know that.
Well, I got there. I think I still got there around 6, and I didn't get in the main panel. I was in the secondary one. So really? You still had to get. Yeah, it was easier to get in, but it was still difficult because we made the decision not to. We were like, we got a room. We're staying in our room. And then it's like, man, like those posters behind you, I always look at them and I'm like.
Well, that one's fun because that was interesting for us because we got into the secondary theater, not the main stage for that. But I was convinced I was going to get us in there for the Last Jedi trailer. Yeah. And so we're at a hotel like a mile and a half away. I get up at like 10 or midnight. I sleep for 2 hours. I get up at midnight. I tell Sam, lock the doors. I'll call you. Call me with anything. I'm going to go get in line, and then we'll figure out if I have to Uber you over here or whatever. What we need to do when it's time to line up. And so I get to the convention center, and I get to the doors, and there's nobody lined up because everybody was inside.
Right? Yeah.
And they had started lining up at 4 p.m. and I didn't know it. So again, I'm getting schooled for this thing. I'm sitting there. I'm literally sitting there thinking, I am the first in line. I am the first in line. And then the security starts explaining that there's thousands of people inside. And I'm like, I'm so disappointed. And then people start lining up. And there's like thousands of people lining up behind us. At about 4 a.m, I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to get Sam and Nathan, because I'm not going to have them walk through Orlando in the middle of the night with it. And the people in line with me, they're like, I tell them about my sons. They're like, where are they? I'm like, they're at the hotel. And they're like, do you want to go get them? And we'll hold your place in line.
That's cool.
And they were really cool about it. So, we got that poster and saw that panel. That was pretty cool. But that's where the podcast idea started.
Yeah. Was
in line for The Last Jedi. Because Dominic Jones, another good, Canada guy, Toronto guy, Dominic Jones from the Star Wars Underworld, came up to Sam while I was taking Nathan to go get something for us to eat, and started talking to Sam about his experiences at Celebration. And they had this really great conversation. And so Dominic says, I think I'd like to have you come on our show. We're going to do an episode about fans' first experiences at Star Wars Celebration. And this, you're well spoken, so much better than his dad. You're well spoken, and you've got a unique perspective. So I think I'd love to have you come on. And so he writes down his email address for Sam and tells Sam to reach out to him after Celebration. So Sam, we're like the night after Celebration ends. Sam's like trying to craft this really perfect email. And he's like, Dad, what should I say? And we're like coaching him on it. And he sends it, and he never hears back from him. He follows up like a month later, never hears back from him. And Sam is a little ticked off about the whole thing. And so he's like, we just need to do our own podcast or our own YouTube show or something. And so we started a YouTube show, and it was a complete disaster, and it was so much more effort for us than we could handle. And we were terrible. Terrible. It was a terrible show.
I'm sure it's still better than half the crap that's on YouTube. Don't even feel bad about it. I'm sure it was awesome.
At least we didn't make up some Star Wars stuff for it. So, there's a difference. It was actually based in fact. So
that was your problem.
Exactly.
This episode's going to be called "Why Rey and Kylo's Force Baby is going to Save the World." That's what...
Well, I've heard Baby Yoda is actually that baby.
Yes.
So, maybe not. Spoiler alert. No. So we stopped doing the show, and we're like, let's try to figure out a way to make this happen. And we decided we're going to do a podcast, and that's where the whole podcast thing came from. Was Star Wars Celebration in Orlando in 2017. So
you weren't in the main room but you were in the second room. So for people that don't know, there's the room where all the actors and the filmmakers come out, and then they have like one or two other rooms where I haven't been in. I've only for Rebels. So Rebels
like overflow rooms.
Yeah, they're overflow rooms.
Orlando, it was really, now we were so fortunate in Chicago. We made main stage for everything on the lottery. It was like we were I guess it's the Disney shill thing.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So no, they got it. We made main stage for literally everything we wanted, which was amazing. So I didn't see any of the overflow there. But in Orlando, they had this theater. It was really beautiful. It was like with a balcony and everything like that. It was just a gorgeous theater with a stage and all that. And Warwick Davis was the host for that theater.
He's so good.
He was a blast. And so, you're literally just watching the stream on this big screen, but you're still with a couple thousand other, rabid Star Wars fans. And so watching the trailer and everybody freaking out and then watching it again and all of that, that was pretty amazing. Interestingly enough, that same theater was where Anthony Daniels did his 40 years of 3PO panel that year.
Nice.
And that was one of the things when we saw the schedule, we're like, we got to go to that. And so that was also for us costume day. So I'm wearing, a pretty traditional Star Wars cosplay Jedi costume and all of that, which is easy for me to get around the show floor with.
Yeah.
But Sam and Nate decided to get, Samuel got, those dinosaur inflatable costumes.
Oh, yeah.
They've got a Jabba the Hutt.
Oh, yeah.
So he gets the Jabba the Hutt. So he's wearing that around the entire show floor and trying to get into the theater with this. And Nate had a BB-8 costume, a big one like that. And so we get into the theater, and what's the guy that does the hype?
Oh, I know who you're talking about, but I can't think of
Is that his name? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So he's doing this hype up moment where he's asking questions, and he's looking for droids in the audience before the 40 Years of 3PO panel. Obviously, droids, right? And we're in the balcony, and I've got Nate in this big inflatable thing trying to move along the front row of the balcony to find a seat that he can fit in on an aisle or whatever. And Mark's running around looking for droids, and all of a sudden you just hear him stop in the middle of a sentence, and he's like, "Hey, BB-8!" like that, and it's everybody looks up into the balcony and they see it, and they pull him down and have him sit on the to come sit on the stage.
Cool.
They do bring everybody up on the stage.
Yeah.
So they bring him up on the stage, and then they're like, Mark's like, "Hey, you can go sit down on the front. Are you here with anybody else?" Right? And Samuel's in the back in his Jabba the Hutt. Right? And I'm like, well, I'm with Jabba the Hutt back there. And he looks, and everybody starts laughing about the inflatable Jabba the Hutt too. And he's like, "Is that your wife?" And I'm like, "Oh God, no, that's my son." Like, your wife's not like... And he brings him up on stage.
No way.
And so then he's like, "Well, you could come up on stage too." So all three of us are up there. And so we were talking before about the special editions and how much I love Jabba the Hutt in there. And you were talking about walking over the tail. Well, it's really funny because Warwick Davis comes out on stage to do his hosting thing, and he sees Sam, and he's like, "Can we reenact the Han Solo scene from the special edition?" So he pretends to be Han Solo, and he steps over his tail and has it and all that. It was so cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So that was it. So we start the show. So back to next December, getting back to the podcast, we start December 1st. We decided to go live. Which was crazy. First time we'd ever done a podcast, and we're going to do it live.
That's
yeah, because I'm just stupid when it comes to that. And it's like 30 minutes before, and I'm like, so I was working with a nonprofit, and I was doing a podcast with them, so I kind of knew how to do podcasts at least. And I had left the mic at the office, and so it's 30 minutes before we had told all these people that we were going to go live. And I have no microphone. I'm looking all over the house for the microphone. And I'm like, "Come on, let's go." We hop in the car. I drive like 10 minutes to my office as fast as I can. I unlock it and turn off the alarms and go in and find it and come back out and lock it up, plug it back in. And literally we're like, "All right, let's go. And let's start the show." So we did the show. And that was kind of the fun thing. And that's all we ever thought was going to happen for us with Star Wars, was we were going to have some fun sitting around our kitchen table with a microphone, geeking out about something that we all were loving with it. And then things kind of took a crazy turn in January. So this is, we loved The Last Jedi. That I mentioned to you earlier. Last Jedi is my favorite of all the Star Wars movies. I love the reality that every single character of any significance in this film fails in their mission, their primary purpose in the film, they fail, which I think is a really powerful lesson for me with, having two sons. Instead of teaching them that life's all about, it's all going to work out. Life is going to be a lot about failure, but it's about not giving up. And so this has become such a powerful story for us. We loved this movie, and we were living about an hour and a half south, depending on the traffic, south of LA, and Collider, Collider Video and their news page and all that announced that they were going to be doing a screening of The Last Jedi at IMAX headquarters. And they were going to have a Q&A with Rian Johnson afterwards. And it was a lottery pick, or actually Stephen Weintraub, who's one of the heads of Collider, was going to pick the the people from that submitted their applications to be in the audience for it, and you had to fill out an application with like an essay and everything as to why they should invite you to come out and all of this. We found out later that 1,500 people had submitted essays. They only had 150 total seats. So 75 people were going to be selected to bring one person with them. And what was really fun was that because we were such big fans of The Last Jedi, at a time when so much on social media was just completely destroying it, people knew where we stood on this movie. And I tagged Collider and tagged Stephen Weintraub in a tweet saying we submitted our application, we'd love to participate. And people just jumped on it. And people that did like The Last Jedi started kind of going after them and encouraging them to invite us. And when we got the invitation, for really kind of fun dad moment for us. There's 3 of us, and they only give us 2 seats. With it, and so we had to figure out who wasn't going to come. With us. And my oldest was like, well, Nathan needs to go. Dad, I know you have to go because the ticket was given to you to stay home and do some days. Let's just get him in the car and take him and see if we can get him in. And so my wife drove her car separately all the way up from Temecula to LA in rush hour traffic in LA, just in case my son couldn't get in to take him home.
Wow.
And then we get in the line, exactly, in the line, and there's this lady that's by herself. And so we ask her if she has her +1, and she's like, no, this person backed out. And so we explained what was going on, and she's like, yeah, he could be my +1. And so Sam got in for it, and we loved it. And it was so much fun. The movie was cool. Then the Q&A happens, and I've got a marketing background. So I understand the importance of like hoarding attention and taking advantage of opportunities like that. So the first question, I'm like, my hand is in the air, and I ask the absolutely most absurd and stupid question. I ask whether I'm the first person that's called on, and I ask, they ask me if I asked Ryan what the name of the porg, or what if Chewie actually ate the porg on the Millennium Falcon. Right?
Great question.
The one that roasted, right? And he's like, no, he didn't eat it, and it was kind of stupid and fun. So about 45 minutes later, I look at my youngest, Nathan, and he is such an introvert. Like, he's great on the podcast, but getting in a crowd, he clams up and he doesn't want to talk. He's nervous in that situation. And I look over at him, and he's got tears coming down his cheeks, and I'm like, dude, what is your problem? Like, we are at IMAX headquarters watching The Last Jedi with Ryan Johnson sitting right there. I'm like, scolding him, Dad of the Year moment again, right? And I'm like, what is your problem? He's like, I have a question I want to ask. And I'm like, so ask it. He's like, I'm scared. And I'm like, well, either you're going to get over your fear and ask the question, or stop your crying. Because you're not going to sit there and ruin the rest of the night because you don't feel, again, maybe my parenting style isn't the greatest. But what was really cool was then Stephen, a few minutes later, says, Stephen Weintraub was hosting it. And he's like, we're going to ask questions for about 5 more minutes. So if you have a question you've been waiting to ask, now's your chance. You have to ask it now. And I look over at Nathan, I just glance at him. He's got fire in his eyes. And Stephen stops, and Nathan's hand goes straight up. And Stephen points right at him, and he asks, what's the name of the porg on the Millennium Falcon? And you see this Ryan Johnson getting this sort of that grin that he gets when you see him in interviews and stuff, where he knows what he's about to do is probably going to get him in a little bit of trouble, but he's cool with it. He's like, I don't know, what's the name? What do you want to call him? And I'm like, yeah, what are you going to say now, kid? Is what I'm thinking, because I didn't know that he had made he and Sam had talked about it the night before. They had thought the whole thing through. They said, okay, if we get to ask him a question, what are you going to ask? And it was the question that Nate asked, what's the name of the porg on the Millennium Falcon? But they literally thought the next step, what if Ryan says something like, what do you think his name is, or something like that? And they had decided to name him. It's a Tuckerization, very classic Star Wars element of our dog. Our dog's name is Buster. And they flipped the syllables of our dog's name and made Turbis. So he had this all prepared in his head. So Ryan asks him, and he says, maybe Turbis. And then Ryan points to the camera and says, "Hey, Pablo," obviously referring to Pablo Hidalgo. He says, "Hey, Pablo, that porg's name is now Turbis." That's a great Star Wars name. And the whole place erupts in applause. And Ryan, has us come and spend time with him afterwards. And he writes down the name and says, "I'm going to talk to Pablo about it," and all of this stuff. And we're like, go home, and people are writing articles about it. And it's this really cool thing. And it's sort of what elevated our podcast where anybody even heard of us before, which was awesome. But then we never hear anything.
Yeah.
And it goes 7 months of complete radio silence from everybody associated. And I'm like, Ryan got in so much trouble. This is never going to happen, but we kind of hope. And then we run in and I'll shorten the story as much as I can now. We go to San Diego Comic-Con and have a meetup with a bunch of other content creators. That was initiated by Steele Saunders from Steel Wars Podcast. And we're there, and Matt Martin comes in. And I know who Matt Martin is because I'm the one that's active on Twitter.
Yeah.
For our show, but Sam and Nate, I keep them off of Twitter because of some of the grossness that goes on.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. And so I see Matt come in, and I'm like, "You know who that is?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "That's Matt Martin from Lucasfilm Story Group." And they're like, "Oh, wow, that's pretty cool." I'm like, "Yeah, go give them a Turbis sticker." We had stickers made up that said #Make Turbis Canon. We were wearing our Make Turbis Canon t-shirts. And I'm like, "So go talk to him about Turbis." And so they do. They go up and they talk to him and they show him the video. And he's so gracious. He's awesome, right? And then at the end, he says, "Well, you know what? If we could find a way to make it happen naturally in a story, I don't see why we couldn't do it." And we're like, holy crap, this is going on. And then again, it goes radio silence for months and months and months until this past August, or actually July. July, IDW announces the Journey to the Rise of Skywalker comic series, the Star Wars 27, Star Wars Adventures 27, 28, and 29. And it's about Chewie on Kashyyyk. And on the cover art that they released with the announcement, there's a porg on Chewbacca's shoulder. So I reach out to Matt Martin. I was real careful. He was pretty awesome. He would interact with us through some DMs and stuff, but I was pretty careful not to message him too much. But I messaged him like, "Is there any chance that porg that's with Chewbacca might be Turbis?" And he's like, "I didn't even know there's a porg in that story." And like, yeah, and he's like, "No, I don't think that they're planning on naming it. I'm sorry." So I do a little 24-hour mini blitz where I attack on Twitter. I attacked John Barber and Derek Charm and like send them the video of Nathan asking Ryan and saying how awesome it would be for them to include it. And they don't like the tweets. They don't respond. They don't do anything. And then a month later, I get a message from Matt, and he says, "Well, I just submitted Turbis's name to a writer. It's completely up to him what happens. But I want you to know that if, I'm doing what I can on my end."
That's cool.
And then it was awesome. Then about a month later, he says, "You guys should probably pick up Star Wars Adventures 27 when it comes out in October." And so then I'm freaking out, right? Because I'm like, am I misunderstanding? Am I, because he hasn't actually said it's going to happen yet. And so we're like, I'm trying to find any way to get him to actually say that it's being named. And he's not responding on any of that. And then I'm at work on October 23rd. It comes out October 30th. October 23rd, my phone starts blowing up because StarWars.com did a big announcement that day about that comic. Yeah. And they mentioned Turbis. And we've been pitching ourselves ever since. The new one comes out in a little bit.
Well,
so it's been fun.
So what were your sons? What happened to them? Like, how did they react when they got the news?
Yeah. Well, see, I'm at work, and it takes me a couple of minutes to get enough presence of mind to stop freaking out and try to call them. I mean, I literally was like, didn't know what to do when I'm reading it. And so I called them, and my oldest was in college, so he couldn't respond. And my youngest was taking care of some dogs for some families, and so he wasn't responding. And it was like another 24 hours before I actually got to see them because of some stuff that was going on with work and all this other stuff. 24 hours before I could actually see them, and we did it. And it's so funny because Sam has always been the cynic, my oldest, where he's like afraid to say it could happen. And so he's been saying all along, it's not going to happen, Dad. Just calm down. It's not going to happen. And he was losing his mind when it actually got announced. Amazing. When I finally see him, he's like freaking out. Yeah, and my youngest, the one that actually named him. I call him finally. I'm like, what do you think, man? I finally get a hold of him. I'm like, what do you think? It's awesome. Turbis is official and they announced it. It's so cool. And he's like, yeah, that's really cool. And I'm like, but that's just his personality. Yeah, that's just
cool.
Yeah, that's cool. His favorite thing to say on any podcast is like, yeah, that's really interesting. And so, that's just who he is. But it's been so much fun, and of course, then for our 100th episode, we were able to actually have which aired on December 20th, the day the Rise of Skywalker hit theaters officially. We were actually able to have Matt Martin as our special guest on that. That was fun. We had to get Lucasfilm publicity, had to actually approve it and all this. It was so much fun to actually go through official channels for something like that. It was cool. But he came on and he sort of told us his side of the story when it comes to how it happened, which was awesome. And then of course for that episode, the things that Star Wars has done or that we've been able to be a part of because of Star Wars has been amazing. Another person that's on that episode is Paul Hirsch, who is the lead editor for the original Star Wars 1977, won the Oscar for it. And so Paul Hirsch came on to talk about editing, but and telling some of the stories about Star Wars and how he got involved in it and stuff. So it's just been, we still pinch ourselves that we even get a chance to do some of the stuff that we've gotten to do because of Star Wars.
And I gotta say, the Lucasfilm story group, when I get a lot of bad publicity or bad talk on Twitter and whatnot, but that is a great story to hear from that. It's very inspiring almost. He reached out to you to say, keep your eye on this issue of it. He didn't have to say anything. He never had to put his name on it or none of them had to do anything, and they did it. And that is just, it just speaks to their character, I think.
Well, and think about it from their side of it, because this has happened since Turbis actually showed up in that comic and the announcement happened and everything. We've been inundated as a podcast with people trying to get things made officially named in Star Wars, or this thing added or that thing added or that kind of stuff. And they're like, can you help us? And we're just a stupid little podcast that has no authority whatsoever. And so, one of the things that Matt and us talked about on the episode was, this is a one-off thing. This has never happened in the history of Disney canon. Now, that used to happen like crazy in the Legends era. They had a thing on StarWars.com where people could submit names for things with it. And Matt actually ran that, I found out, for a while when he was working with that and stuff. But in the Disney era, this has never happened. Where they're so tight on trying to control the canon and the narrative and everything that they just don't do this. And it's never going to happen again, is what Matt said. And so for all of us for us to have been a part of that is just amazing. And we're really careful to tell people, please don't, there's the Make Solo 2 Happen movement, which we're 100% behind. We think that would be an awesome thing to have happen. It's one thing to tweet out that hashtag Make Solo 2 Happen. It's another thing to sort of inundate the cast and the producers and the directors and all of this, trying to get them to come on board. One of the things we had to be really careful of with Make Turbis canon was that we weren't tagging Ryan and tagging Matt and Pablo and all of these people on things.
You let it happen naturally. You let it get to them naturally.
It was never going to happen if we pestered them. Exactly. It was more of, they kept hearing about the hashtags.
So what you're saying is, I've come to the wrong person to try to make James canon in Star Wars. So this is over. We're shutting it down.
I basically had to make a promise to Matt that would not be something we would ever be a part of again. It was so funny. We did get a chance to go to Lucasfilm in November last year. So Matt was so gracious when we met him at Comic-Con. He's like, hey, if you're ever up in San Francisco, let me know in advance if you can, and if I'm available, maybe I can take you and let you see Lucasfilm. And so we decided to move back from California to Colorado, and we like literally made a special trip to San Francisco so we could say we were in the area. We were going to be in the area at least, and so we did that. And while we were up there, there's a funny story with that. We were walking through the offices with Matt, and he was touring us, and we were standing outside one of the big famous matte paintings from Empire Strikes Back. It's Hoth, and the backdrop, the famous matte backdrop. And we're standing there, and he's explaining that this was the actual backdrop for the movie and all this other stuff. It was so cool. And this guy walks by, and I know immediately who it is because I'm on Twitter constantly. Sam and Nathan have no clue who this guy is. And he's walking by, and he sees Matt, and he says, hey, Matt. And Matt's like, hey, Leland. And it was Leland Sheep, the Holocron Keeper on Twitter. Yeah. And I go, hey, Leland. Like that. Just, because like, why not, right?
Yeah.
Just say it with confidence. I'm like, hey, Leland. And he stops. And he turns around, and he comes up, and he shakes my hand, and we start having this conversation. And I could tell immediately that he's the kind of guy that has so many people that think he knows them, that he acts like he knows everybody, right? So he doesn't offend anybody. So we're having this conversation like we're old buddies at this point, which my kids think this is the coolest thing on the planet. So they're like, who are you talking to? I'm like, and so we start having this conversation. He's like, tell me again how we met. Right, that's what Leland says. I'm like, well, we technically, I'm like on Twitter, and then he gets this look on his face, like, oh my God, I just stepped in it, and I'm sitting there thinking, I just stepped in it, and we're wearing our Make Turbis Canon T-shirts all throughout Lucasfilm, and Matt goes, oh, these are the Turbis guys, and Leland goes, oh, those guys, like that. I'm like, holy cow, what was the conversation? So it was so funny. Last Christmas, we sent him a mug, a Make Turbis Canon mug, explaining we want no royalties, we want nothing like this. If you could just make it canon, we'd think that was awesome. Like releasing them of any responsibility to pay us. It's so stupid and so fun at the same time. But anyway.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And now, # Turbis is canon.
# Turbis is canon.
You gotta, like you said, you have to change all your merchandise. You gotta.
It is.
A lot of refunds. Did you like, like when, I don't know, like hockey players get traded, sometimes you could bring in the jersey and they're like, we'll give you the new number, football players and stuff. Did you do that with your Turbis t-shirts?
We've still got like 2,000 stickers. I'm looking at it.
Those are collector's items now. Put them on eBay.
Yeah, that's right. We're like limited edition. We're not printing any further ones. You get them by supporting us on Patreon. No, it's been super fun to see the whole thing happen. So we never really thought, even when when Matt told us about the comic coming out, we didn't even understand the extent of how much he was actually going to be a central character in these comics. He's like right there with Chewbacca the whole time. Yeah. And they've mentioned him again since both other issues have come out. He's been mentioned on StarWars.com a couple of times. So we're having a blast with him.
And now he's in the Rise of Skywalker.
We think so. Yeah. That port's got to be because it's got to be Beaumont. So anyway, we'll talk about that another time.
That's nice. So Solo, obviously you want to make Solo 2 happen. Did you see that opening night? How many times did you see that in the theater?
We saw that 8 times
in
the theater. It was my oldest son's 17th birthday party. So we took him and about, 8 or 10 other kids with it. That earlier that day, I had gone on Twitter and did sort of a can I get a birthday shout out campaign from, of course, like everybody does, Mark Hamill. Let's see, I did Ahmed Best because I thought that would be fun to get Jar Jar Binks to say happy birthday to him. We were big fans of Stephen Stanton had actually interacted with our show a couple of times on Twitter, and talked about some of the episodes like he had listened to them, which was blowing our mind. He actually was our guest on our 50th episode, our 1-year anniversary. So that was pretty cool. But before that, he gave Sam a birthday shout out. And then that night, after we had his birthday party at the house, and we watched Twin Sons, because that's our favorite Rebels episode, with all of his friends, which of course is Kenobi and Maul, and the end of Maul's life in that. And while we're watching it, Stephen Stanton had already wished him a happy birthday before that, earlier in the day. While we're watching Twin Sons, I get a tweet notification that Sam Witwer is wishing Sam a happy birthday. And so I stopped the video and I'm telling everybody, Darth Maul, that guy right there, that guy, he's wishing Sam a happy birthday right now. And then we go see Solo, and we get to the end, and Maul and Sam picked it up before we saw Maul. He picked it up off The Voice. Immediately. He's sitting like 6 seats down from me, and we're on the very front row of the movie theater, and he leans forward. He's like, "Dad, that's Sam!" Like that, and then it's Maul, and we're freaking out. So that after the movie's over, I reply to Sam again, and I'm like, "Sam, did you know?" Because we had told everybody we were going to go see Maul that night. I'm like, "Did you know we were going to freak out about that at the end?" He's like, "Yeah, I had a feeling you probably would." With that, so loved Solo with it. It's different. It's classic fan service, and it's exactly as it should be.
It feels like, you know what, I love Solo, but it does feel like a novel, more like an extended universe type thing, and it feels like it will have a great home on Disney Plus. That's how I feel. I love Solo. Yeah. I would go see more Solos in the theater, don't get me wrong, but I feel like when you watch Mandalorian especially, you're like, yeah, Solo belongs here, I think. This is a good spot for
Bring in some Maul, bring in some Kira, that kind of stuff. I always project, when we were doing the show, of course, when Solo came out, and our speculation afterwards was that the next of the series, if they did another one, would really be focusing on Han and Kira and Crimson Dawn on Tatooine, probably in some type of a rivalry with the Hutt cartel, maybe throw in some Boba Fett with that, potentially setting up where Kenobi has to come into the middle and he's on Tatooine. I think that would have been an amazing way.
I always thought those spin-offs, they should have had little threads that pieced them all together, like not totally connected, but exactly like Obi-Wan could be associated with that Boba Fett in there, and then Rogue One somehow. But that's how I always thought. But I guess we'll never find out if that was ever going to be a plan. But
I think it still could possibly happen.
Disney Plus is amazing. Actually, let's go on to Disney Plus, because you were in Chicago. Because you're a shill, you got into all the main.
Absolutely, we got into everything we wanted.
Yeah, I actually heard you actually sat beside Jon Favreau on the Mandalorian stage. That's what I.
Maybe that's a little of an exaggeration.
But you were obviously in there, so you watched that footage that nobody watched online illegally. Which, by the way, did you get the sense that Favreau was kind of like, oh, I wish everybody could watch? Because at the end, he's like, oh, I forgot to say no cell phones. And the footage just, quote unquote, leaked out like immediately. Like, okay, sure.
Well, we were sitting right behind the entire crew from Collider. So you had Christian Harloff, Ken Knapsack, Joseph Scrimshaw was with them, a bunch of them, Mark Riley. They were all sitting there. We were sitting like right behind them. And it was so funny because they're on their phones like tweeting stuff, not like videotaping it, but then the lights go down and they got into like an argument with the security because they were just trying to tweet stuff out, and security was like, put your phones away. It was nuts with it. But yeah, I think that Favreau sort of wanted it to get out.
He's so excited.
I'm glad it didn't, though. I'm glad it didn't, because it wasn't nearly the same level of production quality that the real series is, and I think it could have created some sort of real negative press for it. So
absolutely, and also I've said this before: is I've been to Star Wars Celebration in Orlando, and I wasn't in the one in Anaheim or in Europe I wasn't able to go to in Chicago. But I do feel, as someone who has been there and not been there, that for the people who spend their hard-earned money, take time off of work to travel to these things, I'm okay with them getting something that I can't get at home. I can stream everything, but sometimes it's like, yeah, it's nice to, especially if they're not going to give you a nice, beautiful poster like that. It's nice to give those people, but like it's not cheap going to these things. It's not cheap, and you're taking extra time off of work because Chicago was 5 days. So I think it's okay. Shut us down for a little bit, put us in the dark for a minute or whatever. We're going to see it in a few months anyway. And that was my perspective on it, who did watch the stream live. And I was like, oh, but I understood it and I was okay with it. But you knew that there was going to be an asset that he was going after, a puck, whatever it was referred to at the time. Did you have any suspicions as to what it was?
Not in the foggiest. Baby Yoda blew our minds like he's blown everybody else's minds with it. I can't wait to see where this goes. We've got some crazy theories. We talk about them on our Mandalorian episode because it's we try to keep that pretty our main show spoiler free because we've got people all over the world. But that one's like all on spoilers. We've got some crazy theories that tie into all the way to the Clone Wars and forward into Rise of Skywalker, and it'll be fun to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, I can't wait. We are, spoiler alert, we're recording this a little bit earlier than people are listening and watching it. So let's just talk about the very first episode of The Mandalorian. You saw a little bit, obviously, like I said, just you and your family's initial, just obviously you really liked it, but was it as dark and gritty as you thought? Was it as funny as you thought? Like, was it everything you wanted it to be or something else?
That's good. By this, what they had hoped it would be, it succeeded it massively. I'm a longer story kind of person. I want to see where things are going to go, and so seeing it in this sort of episodic fashion like this has created a little bit of. I'm impatient at times. I want to know where things are going. But as far as just the general Star Wars feel, the look, the cinematography, I know some people have criticized the score. I've heard Ludwig Göransson talk about the fact that he looks up to John Williams so much that he actually intentionally went away from John Williams' style because he didn't feel like it would be fair to duplicate it.
Yes.
In a series like this, and I think it's actually worked out really well. I've started, now that we are a few episodes in, and you start to see that each episode, while it builds on another, it is one story playing itself out. I'm excited to see where it's going to go. I love it. I love The Mandalorian, and I love where it's going to, what it tells me, like the episode with that Deborah Chow directed, her having received the opportunity to direct the Kenobi series. That makes me extremely excited. So yeah, I'm pumped.
Yeah, I love the music for it personally. I do. I think he does stray away from John Williams enough, but it's also a different. I'm okay with that because of the tone of the movie itself. It still feels very, like you're watching a Star Wars show. But the music is, I don't know. I downloaded it on Apple Music. Yeah, I really like it, and if it suits the atmosphere of the show is what I'm trying to say. So that's your Star Wars story.
That's my Star Wars story.
What's yours? Okay, that's thanks. Thanks a lot for joining us. Why don't you tell everybody? Obviously, they know about your podcast, but say a little bit about it, and then tell them about your Patreon page that they can go check out.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So easiest way to find our regular stuff is Tatooine Sons, SONS.com. Little play on words there. You can find everything that we're doing on that page. And then our Patreon page is real simple as well, patreon.com/Tatooine Sons. We try to build a little bit of a community around that. Our goal with our Patreon page is to try to take some of the online content and conversation offline. We are really in 2020 looking at putting together offline events here in our community for Star Wars fans to get together because what we have experienced at Celebration, at Triple Force Friday, at Comic-Cons and such is that when we actually are looking each other eye to eye and talking Star Wars, that some of the silliness that happens online with the name calling and and all that stuff, it just doesn't happen. And you can actually have a conversation about things that you disagree about. It happened. We did the Fallen Order release at GameStop, and there's about 50 people there. One of them was a complete Last Jedi hater. And before the show, he and I spent probably 15-20 minutes talking about The Last Jedi, and he's rehashing some of the stuff that you've always heard about The Last Jedi, and I'm sure I'm saying things that he's heard 1,000 times about why it's good, and there was moments of some tension in the conversation, but everybody was trying to be cordial and have a conversation about it. I was really disappointed because we got ready to start the show, our live show, and it was about 10 minutes before, and he left, and I thought maybe he had gotten really, really offended by our conversation, and I was disappointed because that's really the goal of these is to have offline events. And right as our show was starting, he came back. He had to go take care of something. He came back. He was there for the whole show. He came up to me afterwards, and he says, I get really passionate about this Star Wars stuff, just like I can tell you do. He says, and if I said anything that was offensive, I apologize. He says, but I really do appreciate being able to have that conversation with you. And then he was like, we're doing a big release for Rise of Skywalker and some other stuff, and he's talked about coming to those. He joined our mailing list and stuff. That's what I think is going to help a lot. If we can get fans start having those conversations eye to eye, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's how it should be. These are just movies, like we said. I think it was before we started recording. These are movies. They're just fun. Let's go have a good time. You don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine. You like it, that's great too. But there's no reason why we can't all just talk about them as civilized beings on this planet.
Exactly.
Yeah, it hasn't ruined anyone's childhood as far as I know. All right, David, thanks so much for joining me here on the Outlander. Awesome hearing your Star Wars story. Hopefully we could do something else in the future.
Definitely.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with David Jesse from Tatooine Sons. Check out that podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, all over Apple, all the Google, wherever. You listen to it, it's there. Also check them out on Patreon. They are over on the Patreon. Check us out on Patreon as well. Thanks for listening, everyone. Music by John Norris. I'm James Bazile, and as always, may the force of others be with you.
Yippee!